Good. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about, in the next half hour, 25 minutes, talk a little bit about getting engagement around our content, how it interacts with users, and give you some tips that are strategic and tactical about creating that engagement. And the reason why I chose this as a topic to talk about is that I think it's particularly important in today's world. Now, should I stand over here a little bit? I'm getting too close to the speaker. Yeah, okay, I'll stay away from that. So I think it's really important. If you look around this place, you see everybody's got a solution, which is fantastic. But as Einstein once said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem. And I think one of the big challenges around today's technology and content deployment is user engagement. And there's some different things that sit behind that, but I want to kind of look at how we address that. And one way to do it is to push harder. So let's put in gamification, virtual reality, and let's really pimp up our e-learning, make it look really smart. But if it doesn't address the underlying issues as to why people are disengaged or unengaged, then I kind of think that it's sometimes not money well spent. And anybody with a background in active listening will know that a good process of active listening can deconstruct the real issues that sit behind it. And I think it's really around the fact that we see learners as objects rather than as subjects. Learning is done to them rather than something that they do. So if we can get them to be more engaged and to do stuff and lean forward, it probably is a cheaper way of doing things, and you'll get greater uptake as well. So I want to kind of look at that as a kind of a strategic kind of piece. And there's certainly a movement towards visual and video learning more these days than there would have been maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And there's some great providers, Thrive and Microlearn and so on all around here that do that. So there's a strong bias towards the visual side. But there's an assumption here that we're moving towards a more modern, contemporary way of addressing learning and so on. And I want to show you a little clip to sort of depack or unpack some of the points that sit behind it. Because I think modern learning started about 20 years ago, actually. So let me play this clip and then just give you some things that lie behind a modern learning proposition. And then we look at some engagement tactics that sit beside it as well. Now, this will all be summarized in a white paper. We're doing the update of our microlearning white paper, which is coming out, I think, next month, August. So if you want a copy of that, just go over there and get scanned. We'll send you a copy. That would be the way to get it. So let me start with Keanu, back in 1990.
Can you find that thing?
Not yet.
Operator.
Tank, I need a pilot program for a B-212 helicopter. Hurry. Let's go.
Cool. I just stopped that because it gets quite loud and I don't want to bug all of our neighbors. So there we go. There's Keanu from 1999. And I go back to that clip quite often. If I get stuck doing a competency mapping exercise or stuck in some instructional design pedagogy, I say to myself, what will Keanu do? So there's about 5 things going on there that I think sit behind a modern or contemporary value proposition in learning. Now, if we could have a real chat and a dialogue, we could do this, but I can't, so I'm going to sort of do my Darren Brown routine and anticipate what you might say to me by way of response. So we'll have to do it that way, and so on. So where does this take place, first of all? So on top of a large building. So first of all, the idea of learning being freed up from the classroom, and it's out and about, and you can get it at any location, is kind of a key part of the modern learning proposition. It can't be locked away in the chalk and talk environment or even at a fixed desktop these days. We want it to be freed up and so on. So the ability to get any place is really key. Secondly, technology has a role to play, clearly, more and more. Technology is a core part of the way that we operate. And we do a lot in the apprenticeships and BTech space as well. And I do some talks at colleges. And technology is just such a core part of education, coming right through people in their teens into their early 20s as well. So it's a core part of what we do, and I think it's exciting. I don't think it should get in the way of everything. Ultimately, we need to see technology like a shovel or a wheelbarrow. What does it do? And if it doesn't do it, let's get it out of the way. But technology is really key there. And as you see, Keanu has got he's got a Motorola, or she's got a Motorola from 1999 as well. Been bought and sold a couple of times. So there's a piece of technology, maybe mobile, that's connecting the people to the third point, which is a knowledge hub. So there is an understanding that there is a reservoir of content sitting somewhere. Now here's a big deal here, and this is around the idea of marketing communication. Because if folks don't know where to get stuff, yeah, and how to get it, then it's a bit lost really, and it's sitting on the equivalent of the digital third floor, unused and unloved. So that's a really important thing, and I think one of the challenges that when I'm talking with customers and prospects is this nexus between marketing communication, internal communication, and learning and development. And the L&D folks sometimes feel under-resourced to do this. They've set the stuff up, and then they're thinking, how do we get this stuff out and about as well? So that ability to create awareness and knowledge of where to get it and how to get it can't all be solved by technology, you know, in terms of metadata and AI recommendations. They have a role to play, but ultimately, if we build it, will they come? Actually, they won't, is the point. So you've got to have an active system. So I think we need to have a sort of a mid-gear between compliance learning, which is something that's forced on people, and people don't like being forced. Do you remember, was it on Apple, and you all had a U2 album downloaded on your Apple? Now, even if you're a U2 fan, which I'm not really, despite being Irish, people just resisted that, thinking, how dare you force an album of new music for free on my phone? How very dare you? So people don't like being pushed into things. And then on the far side, of course, is the buffet approach, which is, we've got some stuff there, it's great, loads of it, 1,000 objects, 10,000 objects, fill your boots. And people are going, well, actually, there is a retail phenomenon, which is the paradox of choice. And that's a fantastic TED Talk by a guy called Barry Schwartz, which is that as you begin to add more and more lines of choice, you're increasing the propensity of people walking away and choosing nothing. So we need to try and get this idea of digital relevance, which I'll talk about in a minute. So this idea then of awareness of this knowledge hub is really, really important. And it's a part of the investment. I think there's good technology out there. I think there's good content out there. But the reason why people aren't engaged enough is partly through the idea, is this of value to me? How can it help me be better, faster, stronger? That's a key part of the value proposition in getting content out there. So I think that's an important element. So we've got a piece of technology, we've got marketing communication, we have got any place to be able to get it. I think one thing though and I think that's so far so obvious really, I think that's important. There's another thing though as well, which is a defined skill gap. Kiana says, can you fly that thing? And she says, not yet. Now here's the question. Do we trust our colleagues to define their own skill gaps and then call down content to do that? Now some organizations are better than others at doing that, and it's interesting to see there's some noddies and some shakies going on around the room here. But that's to do with trust, yeah? And I think ultimately though where the direction of travel is that we are looking for our colleagues to take more responsibility for their learning journeys and not be, you know, the sheep dipping exercise where you've been made to go through this process because you're at that category level whether you need it or not. I think we've got to be smarter, more sophisticated about that. So that idea of a knowledge skill gap, and maybe we can help them do that using 360 feedback and so on as well, that's fine, we can do that. So I think that the big aha moment of these, I've done 4 elements here in modern learning, is the compelling event. Unless you associate some discretionary or self-directed learning with an event in somebody's diary, it's not probably going to get used, right? People are mostly driven by their diaries. And we grandly call that an inflection point. So maybe this afternoon I need to have a conflict conversation with the colleague or with the customer. Happens all the time with customers, I can tell you. But it's something I've put off a couple of times, but I need to be my best self doing that, because once I've started, I can't take it back. Now that's a good way of hanging some self-directed learning on, all right? I need to do this, I don't do it every day, but when I do it, I need to do this right, okay? Now there's a motivation there, and if we can get in at that and identify or associate a piece of content with that event, then you've got a much better chance of getting the uptake that everybody wants, and not getting ignored and unused by self-directed learning. Now I'll give you an example of that. We've done quite a bit of work over the years with London Business School in creating digital companions to their executive programs. And when they look at digital learning, they see it as a way of summarizing content, maybe putting a bit of sexy video there and some templates, and then distributing it via an iPad, and then you're done. But I think there's a much more profound thing that digital learning can do, which is more of a market economy of learning. And what I mean by that is if the faculty are doing something on, say, change in strategy, we'll say to them, how and when are the folks at, say, Nestle in China going to deploy this? And they go, what do you mean by that? And they're going, well, you've got all of this fantastic stuff that you're giving them a week or 2 weeks in Regent's Park or wherever. Retail price of that, by the way, is £20,000 a day, right? Big bucks. So you want to get some value for money. And also, you also acknowledge that within 6 weeks, 85% of that content will have been lost. Right, so I'm not going to do the maths today for you, but that's a huge kind of drain on resources. So we say to them, how and when are you going to deploy this content back in the workspace? So ultimately, we begin to re-describe the block of knowledge into a series of events or transactions. In this instance, it might be how to start a change effort, how to understand the emotional cycle of change. Do you see what I mean? Now, it doesn't mean that everything becomes a series of transactions, but unless the digital learning can be associated with a specific moment in somebody's diary, all it is then is a series of grazing moments. And people these days feel that they're maybe a bit too busy to be doing grazing, and they really need to be driven by a moment in time. And the compelling event that's sitting here is part of the reason for that. They need to be able to fly the helicopter because the baddies are coming up the stairs. So the question then for you to ask maybe of any learning is, what moments are being assumed in the deployment of this? How and when are my colleagues going to use this? Because even that question will give a rigor to the business partnership that L&D has with the rest of the business. Yeah, that makes sense? And it might address some of the somewhat scary data that goes on out there. I think Josh Burson last year said that the L&D department in the United States had a net promoter score of -8. And Charles Jennings, when he was doing the research for the 70-20-10 methodology, said that 53% of managers would actively discourage their colleagues from working with the learning department. Now, that's not just not recommend them, that it actively discourage happening that. So we can moan about that or bitch about the data and say that's not actually fair. But at least what it says is that to be closer to the business, we need to ask ourselves some fundamental questions of the learning. How and when can my colleagues use this material? And it may be even how can this piece of learning make us or save us money? Yeah, be really kind of rigorous about that. And even if we can't answer that, it gets us away from all of the SCORM compliance blah that goes on, that really most people in the rest of the business couldn't care less about. So there's 5 things then that Keanu was coming up with. Anytime, any place. Piece of technology in terms of connection. Marketing, communication, awareness of that knowledge hub and how to call it down. And then a sense of self-diagnosis, the ability to get people to say, where do I need this help? And that changes actually because traditionally in L&D, we have been brokers. We brought in vendors and tutors and coaches and so on, and we brought them in and got best price and validated them and legitimated them and got the smileys together to see whether we're going to rehire them and so on. That's a sort of a broking kind of role. But as we're shifting more to a world of access to free and frictionless content that people can do, then the role of L&D has got to shift to the side a little bit and be more like a Sherpa to guide people to their best endpoints. So it's still a really key role, but it's now using your experience to help people take responsibility for their own journey. And then that last point is what events that are compelling, and if they're not compelling, they won't get looked at, can we imply with this learning? And I think those are the core propositions that sit underneath modern learning. We okay with that? Good? Happy days? God bless Keanu. I bought a jumper like that he had one time. I didn't look like him, though. It's the way it rolls. Okay, so the first thing then, so 5 tips as I promised you. We need to create digital relevance. 2 coordinates, organizational relevance and personal relevance. I've talked a little bit about personal relevance already. What's in my diary? How can I understand my events? Second little things that go on as well. Attention span on learning video is about 2 minutes 40 seconds. So if you're going to try and load up a 10 or 15 minute learning video, watch out, because you're going to see a massive tail off quite quickly. It doesn't mean that you need to summarize the world in 3-4 minutes, but it does mean that you need to chunk it down. So if we take something like coaching, it's like why be a coach, how to start a coaching intervention, how to follow up from coaching, how to differentiate between coaching and mentoring, how to handle turbulence during coaching, and so on and so forth. You chunk it down so the individual can get to the bit that they need and zero in that way. Okay, that's the first thing to think about. The second thing, though, is organizational relevance. So this idea of putting up thousands of objects in a kind of a free jazz mode, yeah, just empirically hasn't worked. And then you've got customers saying, well, we bought all that stuff and nobody looked at it. So first of all, you need more of an active role in marketing, the awareness of the content and the relevance of that material. It isn't necessarily a value judgment on the material itself. So we need to look at the relevance at an organizational level. And there we do mapping against core competencies, vision and values, management curricula, and so on. But here's the deal. Rather than just supporting, let's take a common one at the moment, so be more agile. All right? We need to be more agile. Rather than having just content about being more agile, work with each other to deconstruct what agile actually looks like. What are the competencies that sit behind somebody being more agile? And you create these little halos, what I call knowledge hubs, around these core behaviors that you're after. So being more agile might be about risk-taking. It might be about speed of decision making, things like critical decision making on the fly. It might be being more market aware and so on. And if you can help your folks deconstruct what are these themes or tenets that are going on in the business, you're working with your people to help them. Now here's the deal. Being more agile has been something that's been agreed by the business and has been pushed out. It's not negotiable. But you then can allow them to call down or pull down the competencies to deliver against that. And that push-pull methodology works. It's pretty good. People don't necessarily have to look at all of the aspects of the halo, but you're giving them the choice of being able to do that. And drawing people in towards the proposition is a much better way of doing it than forcing it down their neck, right? Because that just hasn't worked. So the first thing is the idea of digital relevance at an organizational level, deconstruct what those tenets are, and we all have them on the wall. Corporate graffiti. I can walk down any of your corridors and point out all of the things that you care about, right? And they're more than corporate graffiti because they are the way that the organization has expressed itself. So take them apart and wrap halos of competencies around those and then pro-offer them to people going, if we take these seriously, here are the things and the behaviors that are described by that. And then secondly, allow people to go and fetch the content at a personal level. So you've got 5 minutes basically, a 5-minute window of opportunity. So I need to have this critical conversation this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Let me go and see where I can get some stuff. Where is it? I'm on my phone. So I'm stuck in a bad network. Where can I find it? There it is. Let me know. You've basically got 5-minute window of opportunity. If they can't get through because they've forgotten their password or their LMS needs to sync with something or other and so on and forth, they're going, forget about it. I'll get on with it. You've lost your customer. It's the equivalent of being in Debenhams or some other retail store. You bought the garment, you've got your money, and then you look at the queue and you think, feck it, I'm out of here. To hell with this. Do you see what I mean? So a retail perspective around learning is really, really good to look at the motivation of the world from the end of your user. So look at the personal motivations. So I've talked about the what's and the how's already. I've talked about the 5-minute rule. So I think, and I'll just get out of this one because it drives people a bit mad. I think learning is moving away from the kind of humanities-based concept of filling up skills in the hope that you'll have something left by the time we go to deploy it. And we're moving towards a more disposable area of learning. So think of learning your route. We now, I think if you're a London cabbie, you can spend 3 years doing the knowledge, learning 22,000 streets and 300 different routes between them. And it actually changes the shape of the brain if you were to neurally scan the brain of a taxi driver, which is probably a brave thing to do. But now, now we've got GPS. So something in outer space is telling us to take a left rather than a right because they're doing some roadworks around the Sainsbury's. And we don't blink an eye about that. We think, oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that happens, that works. That's pretty spacey stuff. And I think in the same way, we're now beginning to move and being able to potentially use mobile phones to help us be better, faster, stronger in what we do. So the old model of sending people on month-long programs to fill up with some content, by the way, 85% content retention goes back down again. And we don't know which 15% has been retained, by the way, which is even scarier. And then the hope that some of it's left in order to do the job. There's got to be a more efficient way of doing things. So this market economy is to support face-to-face, not to replace it, and to create more efficiency around that content retention decay. So I think it's really key to begin to think about how we can support the business and what we do. Now, I worked with an instructional designer out of a French engineering company a couple of years ago. She says, the problem with your model, Gerry, is that you think we know at the academy what goes on in the business. She says, we haven't got a clue. I go, well, there you go. You better find out if you want to be taken seriously. And learning needs to support people in the business, not the other way around. So let's think about learning more as active business support. Tiny bit of a mini advert, but not really, just to show you some of the things at a practical level we've been doing. In the videos that we do, we've got an Amazon X-ray style overlay now, so you can click in from a 3 to 5 minute video, click into a whole series of overlays and templates and quizzes to kind of whet the appetite and bring people along on a learning journey within an environment. There's a free tool called Echo, so skillpill.com Echo, which allows you to ping to your colleagues going, I'm going to be doing this presentation today, so use this link to create some analytics for me, and it's a how's my driving. Yeah, it's GDPR friendly and all of those things. And allows people to get some straight feedback, and they control to whom they send it about what event they get judged on and the criteria that you use to evaluate it on. So it's subject-oriented evaluation. So that allows people to start getting some real-time data on how they're doing at key inflection points, and so on and so forth. And I think as well the ability to work closely on marketing communication and launch tactics rather than just seeing digital learning as a distribution and an authoring dynamic. If you see things in terms of publishing, you're in the manufacturing side. If you want to think about your population, you need to get into the marketing side and see how people are going to deploy this. So go back to my idea earlier of London Business School. Learning and strategy, one side. How am I going to use this in terms of understanding the emotional cycle of change, how to start a change effort? That's a market economy side. The micro-learning white paper that you can get free access to has got a big description on a manufacturing versus a market economy of learning. I know I've kind of shot through that a little bit. Use data again to track, to sell in rather than just to track. I'll give you a very simple example. We're working with one large bank, and we noticed coming up to September, October, a lot of folks were looking at things like building confidence, work-life balance, managing stress, being more assertive, mindfulness, yeah? And clearly that was mapping, if you like, the circadian rhythm of the organization. But that data told a really simple story. So we said, well, why don't we, coming up to this coming year, proactively suggest that to people? So that's the equivalent of when you're going through the checkout at Marks & Spencer's or Sainsbury's or whatever, you look down and you grab something. You didn't come in for it, but you happen to have got it in your basket. That's not an accident. That's a well-structured environment that's going on. So in the same way, why don't we begin to nudge our population by looking at the data to understand the circadian rhythm that's going on? And you've got simple things like performance and goal setting, for example. But look at some of the other big data things that are going on, the digital footprint that's been left, and then just get slightly ahead of it on the following cycle and beginning to pro-offer things as well. No cost to this whatsoever. But in my view, rather than using data to saying you haven't looked at your compliance 101 thing and you need to have done it by Tuesday or we'll bring in the police on you, to going, no, we're using this data to try and be more agile and smarter in nuance in how we do things. Okay. Right, so I've blabbered on quite a bit, and I've sort of spoken ahead of all of my slides, which is probably not something I should be doing. We've come to 12:30, which I think is my time. I hope you found that useful. I hope I haven't jabbered on too incoherently for you. The white paper actually does it in a slightly more coherent fashion, so go and fetch yourself a copy. Enjoy the rest of your day. Huh? I've got another 15 minutes, have I? Okay, well, if anybody's got a question, do you want to shout? Otherwise, we'll leave it at that. Nope. Good. I've just saved you 15 minutes of your day, guys. Got to be some value to that.